Long after the attack on Houthi targets in Yemen is over, there is a new war front for the White House. This is a war they're waging with the Atlantic magazine. The Atlantic magazine, who had been included in messages about that attack in Yemen, now publishing all of those messages. They've done so in the last couple of hours. The White House saying these don't amount to war plans. Do they? Do they not? Does it matter? Will heads roll in Washington? Welcome to Americast.
Americast from BBC News.
Hello, it's Sarah here in the BBC's Washington Bureau.
It's Anthony, sitting next to Sarah, also in Washington.
It's Justin in the worldwide headquarters of Americast in London, England.
And it is Mariana, aka Misinformation, sitting next to Justin.
It's about 10:30 in the morning here in Washington. That means it's about 2:30 in the UK in the afternoon. And I'm giving you that time check because this story is moving pretty quickly. It's been developing through the week, and then about 2 hours ago, there was a bit of a bombshell. Americasters will all know that the Atlantic editor, Jeffrey Goldberg, accidentally got added to this WhatsApp group where they were discussing plans for bombing Houthi targets in Yemen. Yesterday, there was a huge amount of pushback against him. He is being insulted left, right and centre, called a loser and a liar. And we heard from several members of the administration saying no war plans were shared on this group chat, that the story was being either exaggerated or completely made up. So the Atlantic made a big decision this morning, and they actually published the messages that related directly to the military action. They had kept those back before, saying they were maybe a bit too sensitive to publish, but accused of actually lying, they decided to put them out there. And it's absolutely fascinating to have a look at what they've got to say.
One of those messages says, "This is when the first bombs will definitely drop." That Anthony, sounds to me like a war plan.
Yeah, I mean, we can parse the exact terminology, but knowing when an attack is going to happen ahead of time seems like important information that you want to keep out of the wrong hands.
It feels like the most modern example of a scandal, in so much as like it's like you're seeing these like message conversations that look like the kind of group chats that, I don't know, people have at work or people have in general or even with their friends and family, and then it's like, oh, hang on a second, this is incredibly senior people in the US government. And for anyone who hasn't used Signal is this messaging app that it's a bit like WhatsApp in how it works. It's like private group chats, but what it's known for is its level of security, like the level of encryption, how your messages are protected. So it's something that I use. I don't know whether you use it, Anthony and Sarah, but I use it when I'm talking to people, for example, who've worked within the social media companies and they want to speak to me confidentially. It's like generally the place you go if you want to have a pretty secure conversation. But it's a whole nother thing for the editor of The Atlantic to be added to the chat.
Yeah, there are two components to this, right? It's one, the fact that they accidentally added someone who was not a high-level government individual to this group chat and the security concerns there. And the other thing is the fact that this group chat existed at all, that senior government officials were conducting business on a commercial messaging app and not through traditional secure channels. You asked me if I'd used Signal before. I used it when I was in China traveling with Blinken a few years ago because it is more secure. But one thing was hammered home to me by BBC security officials and by the State Department security folks, and that is that if China wanted to get on my phone while I was in China, they would be able to do it. Signal would not protect me. It doesn't protect your phone from getting hacked. Yes, the message from one phone to another is encrypted, but if they have access to your phone, they can see all of that. And in fact, they told us that any phones we turned on while we were in China could not be used or even powered on for the remainder of our trip with Antony Blinken. So there were very real concerns about the security, not only of Signal, but of any kind of personal phone that had been exposed, possibly exposed to an adversary.
God, it's fascinating, isn't it? Of course, in the many, many and varied defenses that we've had from the Trump administration and from different officials, they've never actually said this is a really, really secure messaging app. They haven't tried to pretend that that's okay. What they've claimed is that the information that was shared on it wasn't classified, that it doesn't constitute war plans, and therefore somehow it was all right to be chatting away in a group chat and using emojis to discuss these kind of things. So we should probably walk through the politics of this, Anthony, and just who's been saying what around Washington.
Hang on, just before you get to the politics, can I intervene there? Because you said that magic word emojis. And I just want to say, before we get to the more serious stuff, I love it that Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, uses the same kind of emojis that I do when I message Mariana.
Me? Yeah, but that's
There's
I
an
think
American
that tells us
flag
everything we need to know.
Yeah, well, I mean, then, who knows? It could be. There may well be a vacancy soon, and if they're looking for someone who can wield emojis really well, then who knows?
They should have added Justin to the
I may
chat,
have to
really,
leave the
shouldn't they?
building. The other thing that really, I just got to say, we will get to the politics of this in a moment. But my favourite bit of it, in the stuff that's just literally in the last couple of hours come out from the Atlantic, there's an exchange where Michael Waltz, the National Security Advisor, says, VP, building collapsed, had multiple positive ID, Pete, Carilla, the IC, amazing job. To which JD Vance replies, what? Question mark. like he's kind of got other things on his mind, and he thinks, what's this man going on about? It's just that there's something about this message group that anyone who's ever been on a message group, including your kind of neighborhood message group at home, you lose concentration. You think, what on earth are they talking about?
Except it's a little bit
It
more
does
serious
provide
than
an
that.
interesting insight. It does provide an interesting insight into the inner workings of Donald Trump's senior national security advisors, in the same way that, say, the hacked Hillary Clinton emails and the Democratic National Committee emails provided an insight into the operations of the Democratic Party. It is peeling the curtain back and seeing how these people really talk, which, Sarah, is fascinating in itself.
Oh, it's amazing for people like us to get insight into what goes on. And I love that some of the pushback from the White House is saying, well, it's great that now we can all see the very considered discussions that took place before deciding to take military action, and that we should all be pleased that the senior officials on this group were taking things so seriously and thinking so deeply about what they were doing.
Yeah, J.D. Vance had doubts about the strike that he expressed ahead of time, and then he was like, well, I'll go along with whatever you say, but I mean, they are not marching in lockstep in private, which I thought was
that is a serious
interesting.
point. So you want to get to the serious stuff. I do think, say what you like about J.D. Vance, and there are all sorts of people in Europe saying all sorts of things about him at the moment, but what he says in public and what he says in private is pretty much the same thing, isn't it? Because he has utter contempt, it is fair to say, for Europe and Europeans.
He atted Europe in the chat. He's
Europe.
indirecting Europe.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Because he makes this comment where he basically says, "Oh, what was it exactly he said? He said we don't need to."
The point he's making, as Anthony says, he doesn't want to go along with it, or he's thinking maybe it's not such a good idea. And the point he's making is exactly the point he makes in public as well, which is these Europeans are useless. They don't protect themselves. Most of the shipping that we're protecting by attacking the Houthis is not ours. Most of the trade is not ours. Maybe the Europeans ought to do the thing. It's not something that's of interest to most Americans. They don't know who the Houthis are, etc., etc. And I mean, what strikes me is that what you can say about him is that he is intellectually consistent. So there is a sort of political point, which I think is absolutely, I know is being absolutely felt around Europe, having done my other day job and interviewed people here about it, that there is this real sense of, oh my goodness, this guy is for real.
And Donald Trump doubled down on that yesterday as well. He was actually asked if he agreed with that sentiment that Europe is being bailed out and that it's pathetic that they rely on the US for defense cover. And he said, yeah, 100%. He agreed with that sentiment. So, I mean, that's one other thing we've learned, I guess, is that is the official policy of the Trump administration, is that they think Europe is, quotes, pathetic.
I mean, that's what's so interesting about it. It's not just the policy points, but actually the kind of dynamics between these people and how much they're on the same page or not on the same page. Like, it feels like such a window into, oh, hang on, okay, this is what JD Vance thinks. Is that what Donald Trump thinks?
Well, J.D. Vance was saying he wasn't sure about going ahead with these strikes because it was America playing the role of doing the work, the defense work, essentially, that he thought Europe should be doing. And he thought it sent a confused message when Donald Trump was telling Europe they needed to stand up for themselves, pay for their own defense, to then do this in defense of the Suez Canal, where more European ships pass through it than American ones. So, I mean, they're on the same page with the broader policy. It was just whether or not these strikes at this time were going to confuse that message. What was fascinating was Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff, then chimes in and says, but Trump's already green-lighted this. And then they all went, oh, that's okay. Yeah, we'll definitely agree with it then.
He wasn't even decisive about it. I think Donald Trump has already green-lighted. From what I hear, Donald Trump has already green-lighted this. So, I mean, it seemed like there was a certain amount of doubt about what Trump wanted there. It's like, oh, he had signed off on it, so now we're carrying it out. And that line from Pete Hegseth, I want to repeat it verbatim because it's choice. Telling Vice President Vance after he had criticized Europe, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic, in all caps.
Yeah.
That's a proper attitude.
Yeah,
in
the all
chat.
caps is catching, I think, in the Trump administration.
Yeah. And is anyone taking the blame? We should let people hear what various people have said about it. I mean, I suppose that the bounciest is the guy who's right in the middle of this, because he is the person who let this journalist in to the conversation. So Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, I mean, can we say, well, let's listen to him. Is he sort of taking responsibility on Fox News yesterday?
I can tell you for 100%, I don't know this guy. I know him by his horrible reputation, and he really is the bottom scum of journalists. And I know him in the sense that he hates the president, but I don't text him. He wasn't on my phone, and we're going to figure out how this happened.
So you don't know what staffer is responsible for this right now?
Well, look, a staffer wasn't responsible, and look, I take full responsibility. I built the group. My job is to make sure everything's coordinated.
But how did the
execute.
number? I mean, I don't mean to be pedantic here, but how did the number?
Have you ever had somebody's contact that shows their name, and then you have somebody else's number
never
there?
Make those mistakes.
Right? You got somebody else's number on someone else's contact. So of course I didn't see this loser in the group.
Well, I mean, I think the fact that he accidentally apparently added a journalist to a national security chat that included secretaries, a vice president, the head of the CIA. I mean, it's astounding. Yes, we all make that mistake. Oh, yeah, I accidentally texted my mom when I meant to text my wife or something embarrassing like that. Yeah, but we don't do that when the stakes are so...
Anthony, but that's a good one.
Yeah, the stakes are so high here. And so, yeah, I mean, that's why generally it's discouraged for government officials to use private messaging apps, because when you're on a classified computer or in a SCIF, which is the secure classified information areas that you can go into that to prevent eavesdropping, where you're supposed to be having these kind of discussions about military operations, it's impossible to accidentally add a reporter to it. The fact that they were kind of freewheeling and doing this on the sly in a private chat group, possibly also to avoid any kind of government records requirements, I think that is what is truly dramatically remarkable about this.
And it still doesn't explain how Jeffrey Goldberg's number was in Mike Waltz's phone. Okay, so it was stored under a different name.
How do you do
But if
that?
he's never met him,
Yeah.
had no contact with him at all, how did that number magically end up in his
is it
phone?
an accidental typo, and it just so happens that typo of the number is the editor of
Well,
the
I mean, is
Atlantic?
that possible, Mariana?
Well,
you're
it
the
is. It is
expert.
in theory. I mean, basically, the way I interpret his explanation is that he's trying to say, for whatever reason, he thought it was someone else, and in that contact detail, it was actually the Atlantic editor's number, but he didn't realise it was because it wasn't saved as his name. It was saved as some other name. And there are different ways that could happen. Like, you accidentally have... I don't know, you've moved phones maybe and merged contacts, and maybe you've somehow got to a place where stuff's in a bit of a muddle, but given your job, you might want to make sure you're not in a muddle. Or you've mistyped a number, say, and then what on earth are the chances that would then accidentally be an incredibly important journalist's number? I can't believe that happening. And then also, how would you... then the other argument is, it's just you've missaved a contact. Or if you're going full conspiracy theory, and I should say that social media, certain areas of it are going full, extreme conspiracy theory, e.g., has someone got into his phone and deliberately changed the contact to thwart him, and again, we have no evidence for or against that at the moment, so who knows. And then there's another layer of conspiracy, which is people saying, did they deliberately add him to the chat on purpose because they wanted these plans to be is there a next level to it, or
Four-dimensional
or
chess
is it
here.
the CIA trying to thwart them, or
always the
all this kind of
four-dimensional
stuff?
chess
No
that
evidence
gets
to
you.
support it.
I mean, if this is just fat thumbs and he typed the wrong number, I mean, that seems, as you mentioned, astounding that it would just happen to be the editor-in-chief who is interested in national security and foreign policy issues. I mean, you might as well have accidentally put in a pizza delivery person or the head of the GRU at the Russian embassy. Any of those,
Yeah.
I guess, would be equally likely, and also just really, really scary to think about. Oops, you could accidentally include anyone into this group chat. I think it's much more plausible that he had the contact already on his phone for whatever reason. Maybe he had talked to Jeffrey Goldberg. He was a member of Congress before he became National Security Advisor. So I would suspect he might have reason to have contacts in the media, including Jeffrey Goldberg. So that seems much more realistic. But he doesn't want to, I don't think he wants to admit that he had Jeffrey Goldberg on his phone, because I think that the president may not like the fact that he was on speed dial with someone who Donald Trump really doesn't respect at all.
Do we think he's toast, Sarah? I mean, not now, obviously, because he's being stuck by, but an awful lot of Republicans, you think of how Washington works, are going to have had the same conversation that we've just had about how the Jeffrey Goldberg's number happened to be in his phone, and they're going to say, he's not one of us, or he's plotting behind our backs, or he's saying nasty things about the administration, or planting information about the administration that it doesn't want out there, which of course is done in all administrations, but the punishment for it generally, if you're found, is to be heaved out at some stage.
Yeah, and Mike Waltz is without doubt the most vulnerable person who was on this chat. So firstly, he's the one who set up the chat group. And as you say, he's the one who is in the firing line for having had this journalist contact. But there's other reasons why he is seen as dispensable as well. To replace him, he wouldn't need a Senate confirmation hearing, which any cabinet secretary would need. So that makes life much, much easier. But also, he's not seen as 100% MAGA. So you've got Pete Hegseth, who's out there also saying things that may be stretching the truth, as he says very forcefully to camera. There were no war plans discussed on that chat. But he's a bit of a MAGA hero at the moment. So much, much better, if heads have got to roll over this, to just quietly sack Mike Waltz and find yourself a new national security advisor than to try and replace the defense secretary and the political fallout that could come from that. So there are many, many reasons why, if anybody's coat is on a sugary peg, it is Mike Waltz's. And the president will probably wait, to the end of this week, see how this all plays out, see if the story dies down before making a decision as to whether or not he does want to fire somebody over this. It's really interesting to hear the way he is backing his team at the moment over an incident that he really cannot be happy about, the sloppiness involved in this. Have a listen to what he's got to say about it.
No, I don't think he should apologize. I think he's doing his best. It's equipment and technology that's not perfect, and probably he won't be using it again, at least not in the very near future. What do you think?
That's sir. I agree with you. Let's get everybody in the room whenever possible.
A lot of times you find out defects by exactly things like that, but I don't think it's something we're looking forward to using again.
I can remember from my time in DC talking to someone about how the CIA director used to travel, and presumably still does travel, and they travel in a military plane, and they put an entire kind of Winnebago thing. Anthony, you must have seen this. There's an actual structure, isn't there, that they wheel into the plane. It's really uncomfortable actually for everyone else, because you have to kind of hang around it, and the director of the CIA is inside this box in the plane. I kid you not. Mary look at me as if I'm crazy, but Anthony, back me up. This is true, isn't it? I mean, that's how they roll.
Yeah, in these cargo planes, it is a box that has a door, and inside it has a desk, and it looks like a little office. And you can see the principals, the secretaries walk in there, close the door. Meanwhile, the rest of us are sitting in uncomfortable jump seats or in seats that have been set up in the middle of this cargo plane, really loud. But inside that box, it's nice and quiet, and you can have your secure conversations.
And there are these things called skiffs all over the city, aren't there? It's a secure, compartmented. I'm looking at it to film me. Information facility, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Secure compartmented information facility. And they're set up in the middle of buildings. I had the most DC conversation ever at the weekend. It was an extremely pregnant woman in my Pilates class who was saying she's a bit worried about when she goes into labor because she can't phone her husband. She can only email him. And we were all like, well, how can that be? She said, oh, because he works in a skiff. She said, just casually, as everybody's husband just works in a skiff.
Moving on to this question of I guess, where this goes now, I was having a little bit of a look at the undercover voters, our fictional characters with all the social media profiles across the main sites, and particularly looking at the pro-Trump ones, because obviously the ones that don't like Donald Trump very much are seeing a lot of criticism about this and how did it happen and why did it happen. Even apolitical Gabriella, our one who's not really into politics, like this has broken through. I think particularly because it's messages and like people love to be able to read the messages, look at the messages. It's the sort of thing that's kind of catnip for online sleuths and everything else. In terms of populist right Brittany or Faith and Flag Larry, who are supporters of Donald Trump, their feeds are just absolutely overwhelmed with either kind of like attacks on the Atlantic editor or trying to undermine the story in some way, suggesting again it's kind of part of the plot by the global elite to take Trump out, and actually this is, you know, it's like this isn't a big deal but everyone's trying to make it a big deal, and you know, this is just like this is just how politics works now and all that kind of thing. Like this sort of like it's not, you know, we won't allow it to stick. And then it's also the flooding the zone thing we've spoken about, which is just like trying to move it on by talking about all kinds of different things.
Sending JD Vance to Greenland next week.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely circling the wagons. And one of the things I've heard from Trump administration officials is that we've survived worse, which I think is arguably true. There are scandals that look a lot worse than this that they have managed to skate through. So I think they think that if they say this is all, once again, another attempt to get Donald Trump, that this is the mainstream media blowing things out of proportion, that what they're doing is perfectly normal and perfectly routine. And yes, a mistake was made, but they're going to move on. Although I do think it's very rich that Donald Trump's talking about using devices and technology after 2016, when he just railed against Hillary Clinton for her use of a private email server and communications that were later deemed to be classified or even top secret, but at the time did not have that classification. So here we are now. Trump and a lot of people, including Pete Hegseth and others who are very critical of Hillary Clinton, have come out and are offering similar defenses to what the former Secretary of State offered. And actually, I think, Sarah, Hillary Clinton had a comment about all of this when this first broke on Monday. Did you see that?
Yeah. She attached a comment on X to the original article with the eyes emoji saying, "You've got to be kidding me," which was a fairly light-hearted response for something, you know, you can imagine she must be absolutely furious about. And in the vein of this all being done by messages and on social media, after The Atlantic just a couple of hours ago has published all of these messages showing that there were, well, certainly military plans being discussed of when the bombers were going to take off and when they would be around their targets. There's a big pushback from the administration. So we've had JD Vance this morning on Truth Social saying that Jeffrey Goldberg, the journalist, has oversold what he had by claiming that it's war plans that were shared in the Signal group. And, well, I mean, that comes down to an interesting debate about whether or not these are war plans or attack plans. But then also Mike Waltz himself has been on X. He says, no locations, no sources and methods, and then in all caps, no war plans. So, I mean, they think, obviously, that they can front this out by simply saying, you know, we didn't put war plans on a chat group, even though they've been published. And I think a lot of people who would look at them would think, I don't officially know what all war plans look like, but that kind of looks like one to me.
Yeah, it says the type of aircraft used. It says when they're taking off, what in general terms they're targeting. After the fact, they said how effective these attacks were. This is all stuff that was posted by Pete Hegseth. And you have to remember, to get this kind of information from a secure location onto a personal phone, which it appears these conversations were taking place on their personal phones, you can't just copy and paste. I mean, there's more to it than that. So it does represent a kind of a dramatic use of information that, if you knew about when the attack was going to happen 2 hours before, might be very damaging if it fell into the wrong hands.
I suppose the big thing, though, is that it wasn't damaging. And I wonder if that's why they kind of escaped from this in the end, that it was a pretty successful mission. It seems it did what they set out to do. And you think back to plenty of much better protected missions when it comes to information, but the mission itself has gone completely wrong. I mean, including the withdrawal from Afghanistan under Biden, where American soldiers killed at the airport, all sorts of chaos. You think back. I think of the entire Iraq War. Frankly, think of all sorts of things that go wrong, even in circumstances where actually the surrounding stuff is all done with impressive zeal and vigor and proper decorum, and the thing goes completely mad. And they may well, I suppose, as the days turn into weeks, just say, look, it was a successful operation. We messed up a bit on signal, and that was it.
That there wasn't a body count here, obviously, I think, as you rightly point out, Justin, is a big factor. Benghazi, another one, an operation that resulted in the death of Americans that Republicans turned in 2012 into a major issue for a decade after. It helped sink Hillary Clinton's presidential aspirations. They can point to this and say it was a success. I think another way that they may be able to get past this is that Republicans control both chambers of Congress, and the institution that would best be positioned to investigate, to provide oversight, to dig in and issue subpoenas and find out what was on the phones or where people were and what they were saying would be a congressional committee. And Democrats, despite the fact that they're calling for some kind of investigation, despite the fact that there are some Republicans who seem open to the idea, it's going to be Republicans controlling the levers here, and it's going to be much more difficult for anyone to get into what some of these unanswered questions are about this chat group.
Yeah, Mike Waltz said that he's asked Elon Musk personally to get the best technical brains to have a look at how this could possibly have happened. Presumably he's turned over his phone to them, but that is slightly different from a congressional investigation.
Mariana, Elon Musk reference. You must chime in now.
I was going to say before, I was looking through who was in the chat thinking, is Elon Musk going to be in the chat? But no evidence of that.
We need a bell to ring or something. The first mention of Musk.
One of our Americasters said to say Elon every time you say it. Just on our scale of the Americast scale of nothing burger, e.g. it's not a big deal, to everything salad, it's a super big deal. Where do we think this ranks on the scale?
I think this is a pretty big salad. I don't think that it necessarily is going to have legs because of the reasons we just discussed. But it is just stunning that they could have this kind of lackadaisical attitude towards information security when they were launching a military operation in which American lives were at risk. And I think it just kind of illustrates the haphazard, kind of fly by the seat of the pants way this administration operates. And if they're operating this way now, I think it's an indication that there are going to be other instances going forward where they make mistakes like this, where things aren't followed in the proper procedures, and maybe this time they get away with it. Maybe this time there aren't drastic political consequences. But if they keep this up, at some point there is going to be something that will really come back and bite them.
Yeah, and among the premium ingredients that are being added to this pretty big salad, I think, is the very aggressive way the administration is pushing back against this story and saying things that just frankly don't ring true and may well be proved not to be true. And that keeps the story going for a few days. We haven't quite got the za'atar breadcrumbs on the top. Is that what really turns a salad into an everything salad? At some point, if Donald Trump is fed up that this is still in the headlines and going on and distracting from what he sees as the great successes of the administration he would rather be talking about, I think he will step in and do something about it. But, even losing a national security advisor in Donald Trump's White House, that's probably not that big of a deal.
Michael Flynn, Donald Trump's first pick for national security advisor, his first term lasted 22 days. So already Mike Waltz is playing with house money. He's been around for several months. Michael Flynn has actually just been named by Donald Trump to be on the board of supervisors or whatever for West Point Military Academy. Goodness. So he's doing pretty well now.
Can I add something as well that may turn it from a super salad into at least a small burger? And that is and it's something we mentioned earlier on, but we've kind of gone off now, but it really does resonate in Europe and in the chancelleries of Europe, is this business of the contempt for the Europeans that both Hegseth and Vance express. And as we were saying earlier on, we sort of know that because Vance at least says it very obviously in public. But I talked to Pete Sessions, the Republican congressman, this morning, doing my day job here in Britain. And he was saying he represents a strand of opinion in the Republican Party. He's quite a fan of Donald Trump, certainly voted for him. He's keen to see him succeed. He was quite upset, actually.
This is interesting. This maybe rounds us off and brings us back to the beginning. The White House have just emailed out an official statement, and what it is a copy of the ex-post that Mike Waltz sent that we were talking about earlier, where he said that there were no locations, no sources and methods, no war plans included in the group chat. And it's, in case you missed the ex-post from Mike Waltz, sent to me by the White House, making absolutely sure that we've all seen that, and I guess underscoring that this is their defense.
There we are. There's nothing here to see. Move on.
Leave the chat.
Leave the chat. Say goodbye.
And it's also goodbye from us. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 And that is it for today. You can catch all of our episodes on BBC Sounds. Bye-bye.